crisis, calling for a non-use of force documents to be signed. We were given cold shoulder and only told by our American colleagues that Saakashvili would never use force. If he uses force, he could forget about NATO. That was the phrase which, well, let's be transparent, which Dr. Rice used in conversation with me. Then when it happened, I reminded her about this and said, Kondi, now he did use force. So what about him forgetting about NATO? There was no answer. So the current system is based on collective security principle inside NATO. The Organization of Collective Security Treaty is also an organization based legally on the principle of collective security. And there is no other legally binding organization which would be of the universal nature as far as Euro-Atlantic region is concerned. And the key principle which we want to become really universal is the principle of indivisibility of security. Russian NATO Council founding documents say that no country should ensure its security at the expense of security of others. And when we speak about applying this principle, for example, to NATO expansion, in spite of all the commitments not to do so at the end of the Soviet Union, when we were withdrawing from Eastern Europe, we were promised that NATO would not be expanded. And we have recently declassified those discussions, including with some of the former secretaries of state and presidents who were saying this to us. So when we say that, we feel insecure when you expand NATO and when you put military bases around our borders, while we all committed, while NATO committed itself not to put any substantial combat forces on the territory of new members, we find find a cold shoulder. We are told, no, this is not against you. Then we present some, arguments that this was the commitment which is being violated. The answer is, it is not against you. Missile defense, plans. We presented calculations showing how this would disturb the strategic balance. Scientific and practical calculations. The answer is, this is not against you. So what President Medvedev suggested is, first of all, we are not asking for any new principles to be invented. We want all the existing principles, first of all, the principle of indivisibility of security, to be made legally binding by all Euro-Atlantic states and also all organizations in this Euro-Atlantic space, organizations which have anything to do with security, NATO, European Union, CIS, Collective Security Treaty Organization, and also to agree that we would not have double standards in resolving conflicts, that we would all be basing ourselves when resolving conflicts on the principles, which are very well known. The principles of the UN Charter, the principles of OSCE, including territorial integrity, including the need to respect the agreements reached between the parties in conflict, including the need for the parties themselves to agree, like what is going on in the case of Nagorno-Karabakh, so that no one can impose a solution, but the parties themselves must reach an agreement which would be acceptable to both of them. Humanitarian needs of the conflict areas, this type of things. And also I think this Euro-Atlantic Security Summit, which President Medvedev suggested to convene to agree on the avenues of the work on a new treaty, should also address the conventional arms, which are really being neglected since the time of NATO refusing to ratify adapted CFA treaty. So it is not to substitute for anyone, but rather to make sure that there is a unified legal space where everyone feels comfortable in the area of hard security in Euro-Atlantic area. Sorry.
Last question. Go ahead. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Jill Doherty from CNN. Russia has frequently, recently especially, been asserting that it has a sphere of interest in the post-Soviet space. But it's not always defined precisely. Could you define that for us? And is it a formal part of talk about mistakes. Is it a formal part of Russian foreign policy doctrine? And also, have you presented this in a formal sense to the Obama administration?
No, Presidents Medvedev and Obama discussed many things, and they agreed, as President Obama himself said, there is no such thing as spheres of influence anymore. And he was, in particular, speaking of the U.S. Attitude towards Latin America. It is absolutely the same approach which we take vis-à-vis our neighbors. When in 2004, President Putin at that time addressed the meeting of the Russian ambassadors abroad, we hold it every 2 years, he bluntly stated that our neighborhood is very important, but you must understand that we don't have a monopoly on this space, that there is a competition, that there are interests which are legitimate, and we recognize this interest of non-regional countries, energy-wise, also from the point of view of transit routes, terrorism, drug threat. So many countries, including Europe, the United States, China, others, have their interest in these regions. The only thing we want is, if it is the time of no monopoly and fair competition, let this competition be really fair. Let the means of promoting this legitimate interest be also legitimate. Let's not have some covert contacts telling these countries you must decide either you are still a colony of Moscow or you want to be with the free world. And these examples are, secrets do not hold these days. Everyone knows everything what is being told about one or another person or a country. As far as Russian doctrine is concerned, yes, we clearly state that CIS countries are our privileged partners. But the fact of the matter is that Russia, for them, is also a privileged partner. Why? Because families live on both parts of the border. Because the infrastructure, transportation, social, economic, and otherwise, is so much common that you really cannot build a wall and forget about your neighbors. Culturally, historically, family-wise, we lived together for centuries and centuries, and it's just only natural that they are our privileged partners. And it's only natural that we are their privileged partners, not to mention new aspects of this partnership being, for example, migrant laborers. By the way, when President Medvedev first mentioned this term, privileged partnership, the noise which immediately was raised surprised me deeply. For the first time, the term privileged partnership was used some, I think, 35 years ago to describe relations between the Soviet Union and France. No one raised any hell at that time.
Mr. Minister, you have been masterful in covering a huge range of issues, generous in answering all our questions, deeply informative and very candid, and I hope everyone will join me in thanking you so much.